All right, so good morning. Hopefully you guys had a good weekend. We're back at it today. Yes, you got 2 handouts, and no, I'm not insane because this one says assignment 107. It's supposed to say assignment 107, even though technically speaking you're still doing 103. And that is because this is your final portfolio. This is your final for the class. It starts today and ends on the day of the final. You have a long period of time to work on it. This will require work outside of class. There will be time to work on it today in class. Then there'll be another time where we'll talk about covers in class. And then at the very end, we'll kind of do a walkthrough, brush up, correct things. But a large part of the work needs to happen on your own time. Just the way the semester works out, we don't have a lot of extra time to do it. That being said, if you want me to look at your portfolio at any point along the way, please schedule time during office hours. Come find me. I'd love to look at it. I want it to be better. I don't want you to just feel like I'm not giving you feedback. Like the more you want, the more I'm happy to give. It's just the nature of the course. I can't do more in class with you on it. So, a couple key things. Number one, it's worth 30% of your overall grade. So, if you slack off and don't do it until the last week, it will reflect in the final portfolio. It will not turn out well. It's a fact. I've taught long enough to know that that's a fact. So, you need to work on it early and often. And plan accordingly. Don't rush at the end because it just won't turn out well. I have had students who have thrown together something in a day or two, turned it in, and dropped their grade in the class significantly. So I'm telling you this as a warning ahead of time that it's a big deal. 30% of your grade is a really big deal. So treat it as such. It is due at 9:30 on Wednesday, December 12th, which seems like it's a million years away. I promise you it's going to happen really fast. It's going to be here. They changed. I used to always have my final and the portfolio and stuff turned in on the Monday of finals week. But since they shortened the semester and whatever, I'm required to have my final on my last day of class. And on Monday of finals week, we have a normal class. I don't make the rules. So you have to be here for a normal length class. Go figure. So you'll be here. It'll be a working session. I'm not going to batter you with stuff. I'm going to let you work. I'll help you correct things, whatever. But that being said, as much as I would rather have it due on Monday, it's going to be due on Wednesday, the 12th. But it does give you a really nice long break because you finish that week, and then you don't come back until almost February. So it's not so bad for you guys. You will be posting an online version of it, so that I can see the stuff online, and you can go back and look at previous semesters' posts online with their portfolios in it. However, this is the one time in the semester where I will actually grade the paper version of the portfolio. So the physical portfolio that you hand to me is what I will actually be grading. Other than that, I always grade the online version. So how it prints and what it looks like and how it's bound all matters as part of this. We're going to talk about portfolios today quite a bit. So part 1. Beginning 10-8, that's today. We're going to start going through part 1. Part 2 and part 3 you're going to work on later on in the semester. Trying to think if there's any other big notes. Nope. I want you to be aware that when the class ends on that Wednesday the 12th, I will not take any more work of any kind. So when class is over for the semester period. No exceptions. No, but I, got a flat tire. No, Class is over. Okay, I just want to be really clear that that's the end. So when class is over, that's it. So it has to be turned in by that time. It's just part of real life. There are deadlines. So we'll go through exercise 112 in just a second. I'm going to show you a lot today about multi-page InDesign layouts and what masters mean and that sort of thing in InDesign. But before we get into that, I want to talk portfolios a little bit and give you an introduction to portfolios in general. I will do an entirely separate lecture on just the covers. So we'll talk about what covers you should do, etc. later on. Today we're going to talk about the content that goes inside the portfolio. And so as we begin, the fundamental thing about a portfolio is it's somehow telling the story of you. And a lot of times people think of it as, oh, the portfolio is a body of my work. I'm trying to show off my work. Well, it's not really. Yes, technically it's a body of your work. Yes, technically it has all of your projects in it. But that's not really the purpose. The purpose is to show who you are as a designer and what your skill set is as a designer. And that's different. You want to be able to present that portfolio to a school, to a scholarship, to a potential job, to an employer. You want to be able to present that to somebody and have them have an understanding of who you are as a designer. Because if they're trying to pick you guys to be in their firm or to be in their school, they want to know how you're going to fit in. They want to know what your skill sets are. They're less concerned with how many prizes you won off of some project, and they're more concerned with who you are as a designer and how well you'll work with other people and that sort of stuff. So the fundamental thing about a portfolio is it's telling the story of you, the designer. Who are you and what's important to you? The other thing that happens is portfolios all too often focus on, these are all the skills that I know. I'm really good in Photoshop, and I'm really good in Rhino, and I'm really good at rendering in V-Ray. Okay, that's great. Can you design? Can you be part of a team? Those are the other things that an employer or a school are looking for. And you can show that same thing in a portfolio. You can also show all of that work through the guise of you as a designer. It will inherently come out. But if you divide up your portfolio and you say, here's a bunch of Photoshop work, here's a bunch of Illustrator work, it's a skills-based thing. You might get a job, but they're going to say, oh, this person's really good at AutoCAD. He can just sit there and do AutoCAD all day. And that's probably not what you want as a designer. So you want to think about what makes you unique and different. There's 100 other people applying for this job. There's 1,000 other people applying to this school. Why should you go there and somebody else shouldn't? So have some kind of an introductory page to your portfolio. This is important. When you first open that portfolio, what does somebody see? This is the first impression that they have of you. Are you organized? Is it clean? Does it say who you, the designer, is? You know, what's your name? What are you doing? Are you applying for some specific position? What is it? Identify what projects they're going to see. It's like a table of contents. These are the 3 projects I'm going to show you. These are the 5 projects I'm going to show you. Maybe it's in text. Maybe it has a little graphic next to it. I'll show you some examples as we go forward. And maybe you include some extra information about yourself. I've seen it in the beginning where the first page ends up being like more of a resume, where you're showing this is who I am, these are the job experiences I have, and whatever. That can be successful, especially if you're turning your portfolio into somebody blind. So you're applying for a job. You don't get to go to an interview. You just show them you send in your portfolio. Sometimes having that right there in front of them can be a good idea. A portfolio is fundamentally a living document. It shouldn't just exist in its static state. So if let's say, I decided I was going to go get a job. I wanted to get a job at an architecture firm. And I pulled out my portfolio that I applied to grad school in 2000. When did I apply to grad school? 2005. And I pulled that out, and I handed it to my employer and said, hey, here's my portfolio. Do you think that would go over particularly well? No, it's like 12 years out of date, 13 years out of date. Those projects might not be relevant anymore. So because it's this living document and because you somehow have to show off who you are as a designer, it needs to be current. It needs to show the project you're currently working on. So at least every semester, you should go back and add a few pages to your portfolio. It's important. That's how you keep your portfolio current. Ideally, projects won't be older than 3 to 5 years. Now, every once in a while, you have a really stellar project and you want to include it. But in all likelihood, for me personally, I wouldn't go back to grad school and include a project from grad school. It's not relevant to who I am anymore. I've moved on from that. So you, as a designer, need to be thinking about that. 3 to 5 years is a good threshold to have. The next thing that's important to think about is what is the purpose of each thing that you put in the portfolio. You're picking your major projects, and I apologize for the industrial design guys that these are all architecture projects and architecture portfolios, but the same thing kind of applies, right? So this is your portfolio. I'm choosing to put this particular project in the portfolio. Why? Why would I put this project in? Maybe it shows some specific design angle. Maybe it shows that you're adept at a specific type of design. For the industrial design people, maybe it shows that you can do a diversity of different projects, different types of things, big scale, small scale. Those kinds of things really matter. The thing that you want to avoid here is repetition. I'm really good at V-Ray renderings, so all I'm going to show off are V-Ray renderings. Well, it's kind of boring. Yeah, you can always have a V-Ray rendering of every project that you do, but what makes this particular project unique? Why are you showing this as a purpose? Show diversity in your project and in your skill set. So if you're really good at doing marker sketches or drawings or hand drawings or paintings or whatever it is that you're good at, weave those in too. It shows more of who you are as an individual, not just that you have a specific skill. So think carefully about what belongs in the portfolio and why. So the other sticky item is group work. And inherently when you're in school, you end up doing group work. Here at DVC, if you're in 220, the next architecture studio, the big one, you're going to do group work. If you're in 221, the skyscraper studio, you're going to do group work. So how do you include group work in your portfolio? Well, you can't just put it all in as your own work and not acknowledge that you had a partner at all. That would be a bad sign. Because remember, chances are whoever your partner is applying to the same school or the same job. And so when their portfolio shows up, there's going to be the same project with the same images in it. That's a bit of a problem, right? If you were the employer and you had two people that gave you portfolios, one of which said, I did this whole project by myself, and the other one said, I was in a group and we did this project together, would you trust the one that said he did it all by himself, or she did it all by himself? No, you wouldn't. You'd throw that one out. And you might say, OK, well, this person clearly works well with the person who acknowledged that it was group work. OK, well, maybe they work well with others. So what you need to do when you're part of a group, it doesn't mean you can't include it. It means that you absolutely should include it, but you should focus on what you contributed to the group. What drawings did you do? What part of the project did you work on? And make sure that is the prominent piece that you're showing in your portfolio. Yes, of course, it's the same project. But inevitably, with group work, unless you have a really lame partner who does no work, which can happen, sorry. Unless that's the case, chances are you did something. You worked on all the floor plans. You worked on the 3D renderings, and your partner built the model, for example. OK, that's good. The partner B, who worked on the model, should show photographs of the model and show the design process of the model. Partner A, who worked on the floor plans, should be showing the floor plans. That's how you diversify, and that's how you show what your contribution was to the group. And so I'll show you an example of a former student's portfolio a little bit later on, where he was part of a group and how he identified that part of his work. A killer portfolio is a well-designed portfolio. And this is kind of, there's a reason that I'm bringing up a portfolio. We're talking about InDesign. Is that when you're working on a portfolio, the graphic design is absolutely critical of that document. But the best portfolio possible is one where you don't notice that it's been graphically designed to begin with. You become so immersed in the content of what the person is showing you that you could care less how it's formatted or what it looks like. That part goes away. The truth of this, though, is that if you don't carefully consider the graphic design, the errors in the graphic design will stand out and overweight your actual work. So it's this weird kind of cycle. You have to design it perfectly such that the perfect design goes away and you don't notice it. So it's a little weird. This takes time to evolve. So if I use an example from my own world, from my own life, when I went to apply to grad school, I did 7 complete portfolios before I ended up on my last portfolio, the one that I actually used to turn in. 7 full portfolios. And each time I would throw it out, saying, no, this didn't work. Sometimes I got to the point where I was like, this is feeling really good. Like, I'm excited about this, and I'd go show somebody. I had one really great example. I worked really hard on this portfolio. I thought it was so cool. I had these flaps that would open. Like, it was awesome. I was like, this is it. I'm so excited. You know, the typography was well done. The wording was good. You know, it was like awesome. And so I went to one of my former professors, and I said, hey, you know, can I come over? You know, can I come to your office hours? Can I come to your house or whatever and talk? I went to his house, and we sat down, and he looked at my portfolio. And he said, yeah, you know, this is pretty good. He said, but what happens when this happens? And he picked up my portfolio, and he shook it, and all the little flaps opened. And he said, OK, now look at it. And I opened it, and the content on one side of the flap, when you opened the book, was now on the wrong page. So you'd read the content, and it didn't have anything to do with what was on the page, because the flap was stuck open. He said you can't assume, in this particular case, that somebody's going to put it back the way you want it to be. It gets thrown around, people use it, and whatever. So in that context, I spent all this time working on it, and it wasn't until that moment that I realized that I made a big error in how it was working. So this evolution, this iteration process is absolutely critical. That's how you're going to get to the best portfolio. And so in my case, it took 7 tries, and I got a good portfolio out of it, and I made it into grad school. Seemed like it was successful. Could I have made it in with one of the other ones? Maybe, maybe not. It's really important that you take your time. Trust your intuition. We talked all about that in a lecture as well. So make sure you trust that intuition as you're going forward. So a little bit more of the technical details. We want to think a lot about the inner margin versus the outer margin. In the case of the binding, we have to be really careful about how we're choosing to bind our particular portfolio. What's the binding style going to be? When we bind the portfolio, we're going to lose some of the content in the center of the page. And I'll show you, I'll bring out from my office, I have a bunch of previous portfolios that I'll bring out, and you guys can look at them today to get ideas of what other students have done. But as those pieces of paper come together, depending on how it's bound, you're going to lose stuff. It's either going to have a bunch of holes punched through it, or it's going to be in the binding, in the cracks, such that you can't really see it anymore. So you might lose up to 1/4 inch. Be aware of that. Plan accordingly. Be prepared for something like that. So the other thing that we're going to introduce today is the concept of bleed. And bleed is absolutely essential for professional printing. In your case, most of the printing that you're going to do isn't going to a professional shop. It's not going out to some place where they're actually going to trim pages and make multiple copies of things, etc. If, however, you were in that realm, and for the purposes of this particular portfolio, I'm going to ask that you think of it in that context, even if you end up just going to, the printer here at DVC. The thing here is that, let's imagine for a second that we're in charge of writing or printing a magazine. Money magazine, Time magazine, whatever. Okay, there's hundreds of thousands of copies that have to run off these print presses. True? When those copies come out, if you want an image to go all the way off the edge of the page, you want it to bleed all the way off the edge. If they print all these copies and somebody's cutting up the magazines into their pieces and stapling them together, not all of the pages are always going to be straight. One of them's going to be slightly crooked because it came out of the printer wrong and whatever. And it's going to cut and it's going to look fine in the magazine. But if you wanted a full bleed and you didn't include extra information or a little bit of extra photo so that when it is crooked and gets cut, you have extra crookedness to cut off, you'd end up with little white bars on the edges of the pages. You guys have probably seen this happen before, where there's errors. And those kinds of things, especially when you want full bleed, completely destroy the look of the page. It's kind of like sending it to the printer, and the printer can't print full bleed, so it shrinks to fit, and you have that annoying little white border around it. Those are things we don't want. So when we're setting up our InDesign file, we can set up something called bleed. And this is an extra 1/8 of an inch to an extra 1/4 of an inch larger than the actual page size is supposed to be. And when the print shop, when a professional print shop goes to print it, they will print the whole page, including the bleed, on a larger piece of paper, and then they'll trim it to be the actual size you want. So when you open the portfolio, it will go all the way off the edge with no errors. Could you do the same thing here at school? Sure. You could do your drawing, your portfolio. You could print it on the next size up paper. So if you were doing an 8.5 by 11 portfolio, you could print that 8.5 by 11 on an 11 by 17, trim it off. You can include these little trim lines. You could trim it off, and then you'd be sure you had full bleed, and your images actually go off the page. The other option, of course, would be to always have a white border around every page and not do full bleed. But I'm going to show you this in InDesign, how you set this up. The other thing is we're going to be in the CMYK color space. That doesn't mean anything to you yet because we haven't had the big color lecture. I will have the color lecture. We will talk about what that means later. But it is important for you now to know that you should be in the CMYK color space because it's going to be printed. And that's important. So here's an example setup for a portfolio where we have our margins. They're arbitrary. We have a little bit more space in the center here and here because of the binding. It's going to go through there because we're going to lose content in that center section. Our actual page is this line right here, and our bleed is that extra line that goes all the way around the very outside. So when it gets trimmed, we make sure that we include the full image. So I'm going to show you some examples now. This first example is a little bit old. It's from a guy named Alex Holgraf. His website is visualizingarchitecture.com. He's an incredibly talented architectural visualization specialist. This is what he does. He makes beautiful visuals. And so when he was in school, he found that his real area of expertise was creating these really beautiful images. And so instead of going out to be a traditional practicing architect, he decided to start a company that all they do is the really beautiful visuals for other companies. So the other companies go to them and say, we need the spectacular image to go on the front of this competition. Here's our project, here's our SketchUp file, here's our Rhino file. Can you make it look pretty? And so his firm makes it look pretty. In the process, he also does these portfolios. This was his volume 3 portfolio. He's a very good graphic designer. He's really good at graphics. This was the cover. When it gets folded over, that's what it looks like. And we'll again talk more carefully about covers a little bit later on. But this is his 2014 portfolio. And I like to use an example because it's very carefully contrived. So this was that first page. Remember I said it should have information about who you are. So here we have, this is Alex Holgraf, and it's 2014. He also has, this is in the design process, so it's not the completed portfolio. There's placeholder text in some places where he's intending to put real text. Then we have a table of contents. And he's clearly identified, these are the 4 projects that I'm going to show you as part of this portfolio. Just these 4, and a little bit of a blurb about what those 4 projects are. Then we move on to the first page. Now I think it's really important. He's thought carefully about how to identify which project you're in, what are you looking at. And if we go back for just a second, we have a graphic. We have a 9-square cube. We have the visitor center, which is, here, let me draw on here. Right, these 4 things are graphic representations of what the project is. It's just a little diagram. We'll talk about architectural diagrams in a bit. And he's chosen, for example, to include this diagram on each page that he does relating to that particular project. There's the diagram. It shows up on that page every time, so you know what page you're on. This could be the same as doing page numbers. That would work. But it's some kind of a key that tells us where we're looking. So let's look at this page for a second. If we think about this page, we have kind of a 2-column layout where we have 1 and 2. This particular is just a full page over here. This is just a full page spread. There's not really 2 columns, though this image technically has a division line right there in terms of how it's laid out for its columns. He's used 3 of the columns to show 1 image, and then he has 1 column of text left over. As we go forward, pay attention to that. So here we are again on the next page. We've got a division here. There's 1 and 2, and this is all one big page, like the last page. It's flipped, but it's essentially the same layout. Same fonts, same typefaces, consistency in the typeface, consistency in the type size. And we move on into, this is a different project. Okay, I want you guys to pay attention in this project to this division. So we've got a horizontal flow line that's happening here. That's up maybe a quarter of the way for the page. And as we move on to the next example of this, there's that flow line again. It's at the top of the page this time. But do you see how he's using that same vocabulary going through the pages? Now, if I were to just flip through these pages, would you be thinking about the fact that there was a flow line there and that it was consistent page to page? No, you'd be looking at all of his visuals, which are really enticing and really intriguing. You want to look at his visuals. But the organization makes it such that you focus on those visuals, not on the organization. Another example here. This one's broken into 3 columns. There you go. 1, 2, 3. Same thing on this page. 1, 2, 3. So it's a different layout, but it's still a consistent setup. There we go. This here falls where we have about, so there's there. This should look similar. There's a division here. That line there, that flow line, happened earlier in the book. Same division. I think it's also important he's using a tiny little bit of space to differentiate this whole page of graphics. Instead of doing bleeds into one another, that tiny little white bar makes a big difference. It's not too thick of a white bar. That's the other thing that people tend to do in portfolios, is they make 1/4 of an inch of space in between their images. It's too much space. Get them closer together. But notice that this space here and here and here and everywhere that it's used is exactly the same. Let me wipe it. There we go. That little bit of space is exactly the same. It's the same amount of margin. Okay, let's look at another example. I have no idea who this person is. I found it online, but that's fine. Still a nice portfolio. First page. This particular person chose to have a little bit more of the resume included. We have the resume. This is information about who he is, or she. Like I said, I don't know. And then we have the table of contents. Little graphic. These are the pages it starts on, etc. And then we can get into the actual pages themselves. So the format's a little bit different. It's not as landscape. It's a square. We've got the text. We've got a column of images. Then we've got the single big image. Another example here. No information about the person. The only information is on the cover itself, right there. I would rather have a little bit more information about the person on this page. We've got a table of contents. We've got the projects listed. No special graphics here, but we still have that initial organization. Then he follows up with his resume. And there's an example from inside the book. For me personally, I think the white text is a little bit too hard to read. It's a little bit too thin against the colored background. So I think that's a problematic thing. The other thing that I haven't quite understood about this particular portfolio is this is the spread. That's the fold line right here. So this folds together. So the object, or the building, is right in the crack of the book. So you're not really seeing it. If you took this and you moved it over, so it was a presentation where this was over here, right? You'd have rule of thirds. There's your 2/3. There's your 1/3. You'd have it right here. You'd be able to put your text over here. That would feel a lot better from a graphic layout, rather than centering the project right in the crack where you're going to lose it anyway. So just something to be aware of. Don't make those kinds of mistakes. Again, I don't know who this is, so I apologize out there if you're listening. Another example of the pages. This is a very fluid page. There's a lot of flowing lines as part of it, but it still really divides out into columns. They've thought of the content in columns. They've broken the column a little bit with the whale image that spreads across. But for the most part, this is still divided up into columns. And here we are in a more technical setup where we're actually seeing the columns. So this one that's graphic has the columns as an underlying structure, but it's harder to see. And then here we are back with the actual columns. OK, so this is Bashir's portfolio. He was a student in your shoes at DVC. I like to show this as an example because it's a very good portfolio, and it shows the kinds of projects that you do here as an architecture student and how he chose to show them. That was his cover. And then, like I said, each of these is a spread. So you're going to see the spreads as they go across the page. He led with an introduction that talked about his freehand sketching and how he got into what he was doing here and where he wanted to go. And then he started to think through each of his projects. So he started with the Mondrian Museum. He was emphasizing the fact that he sketches first before he does the actual conceptualization, or before he does the actual design work. So this is early sketches, a little bit of nice ink wash, really nicely done sketches. And then he moves into the technical drawings, models, photographs, etc. Then we move into the next example. There's the Calder Museum. You can see the similarity of the two pages and how they're laid out. There's another example. I'm skipping through. I'm not showing every page of the portfolio. Here's another example, Serpentine Pavilion. I show these two side by side because they're working with the same general vocabulary, where you're taking 2/3 of the spread and making it your image. This is an example of one where he worked with a group. You see the first page where he introduces this project. He says these are the people that worked on the project. He's not trying to hide the fact that this was a group project. And then when you move on to the actual information about it, he talks about, first off, these are the things that I've been working on. This is what the intent of the group was. And then he moves into a real big focus on the part that he did, the computer part that he did, the programming part that he did. So it's important to remember to identify the part that you did and make sure that shows up in your portfolio. Same vocabulary, same font. Next project. So if you want more, there's a new Arch Daily article out on portfolios that's very good too. This is where I got a lot of the slides from this. Visualizing architecture, if you haven't visited Alex Holgreff's website, I would really encourage you to do it. He does beautiful, beautiful work. It's a great place to get inspired on collage work and whatever. So we're going to move on. We're going to switch over into the world of InDesign. I'm going to walk you through multiple page documents, so bear with me while I switch over, and then we'll keep going. Okay, so we're going to continue on in InDesign here, and really the purpose now is to talk about building something that's multiple pages. Thus far, everything that we've done in InDesign has been limited to just the one single page, the one big layout. What we're going to create now is more of a book, and so I'm going to go ahead and open up InDesign. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and create something new. And so from here, I need to think carefully about the size of the portfolio. And like I said, I'll bring a bunch of examples. Generally speaking, you're going to want a size that is up to 8.5 by 11. I will not, for this particular portfolio, and I certainly would not encourage it in life, but definitely in this class, I don't want anything larger than 8.5 by 11. I don't want an 11 by 17 portfolio because it's too much space, and most firms and or most schools won't allow a portfolio that's that big. And part of the reason that they don't allow it is they don't want to keep track of something that's that big. They want it small enough to be able to put it in a stack. If they get a stack of 8.5 by 11 portfolios and yours is 11 by 17 and it's flopping out, they're not going to be particularly happy. So we want to keep it small and concise. You're not limited, however, into doing it as just an 8.5 by 11. If you want to do it as 8 by 8 or I don't know, 4 by 11 or some other size, you can. Depending on what you're using the portfolio for, there are requirements for a particular portfolio. So sometimes if you're applying to a specific school, they have a page limit, the number of pages that you can have. They have restrictions on whether you can do back and front or whatever. And so you want to make sure that you read ahead of time what the restrictions are for the place that you're trying to apply. Generally speaking, using something in the realm of an 8.5 by 11 is pretty safe. Most of the time that's okay. And the only thing that ends up coming into play there is the number of pages that you're allowed. If you did your portfolio well, you can always cut pages at the end that are older projects to make it shorter if the requirements are asking for something shorter. So as I start to set this up, I'm going to go into print documents because this is going to be a print document. And I'm going to use the letter size piece of paper. That's fine. I'm going to change my units from picas into actual inches. And personally, I like mine in landscape orientation versus portrait orientation. I've seen portfolios both ways. It's just a matter of which way it works for you. So I'm going to keep it in its landscape orientation. Now, I'm not going to worry about the number of pages because I can keep adding pages later on as we go. However, this box now becomes important. And that checkbox says facing pages. And what it means by facing pages is, do you have two pieces of paper, and when you open the book, do you have content on the left page and on the right page? Or do you have just a book where all the content is on the front side, and when you open it, there's no content on the back side, on the left, and just content on the right side? Does that make sense? So If you want it such that there's content on both sides of the page, you want to make sure that this facing pages is checked. Generally speaking, people use facing pages, but it's up to you and what feels right to you. So I'm going to go ahead and check the box for facing pages. The columns and the column gutter, I'm not going to be overly worried about that for right now. We'll leave that. Margins, they're set at 1/2 inch. If I wanted to specify margins, I could do that here. I could say that the inside margin is 1/2 inch, and I could say that the outside margin is 1/4, for example. And the top and the bottom, let's make those 1/4 and 1/4. I don't have to. I did break the chain so that they're not all the same because I wanted to specify that the inside was a little bit more than the outside. Below that, we have bleed and slug. I told you we were going to work with bleed today for the first time. So bleed, this is that extra space that goes around the outside. We do want to set this. Our top, bottom, outside, and inside is at least 1/8 of an inch, which would be 0.125 inches. You could do it more than that. I'll do it just at 0.125. That's enough for my purposes. I'm not going to worry about the slug, and I'll go ahead and say create. And there's my document. So this is the first page of my document right here. And you see that the white page, as it has before, represents the actual 8.5 by 11 page size. You also see that there's a reddish pink line that goes around the outside here. That is the bleed line. So I want to make sure any image on this page that I want to have full bleed that actually goes off the edge of the page needs to go all the way to that red line. Okay? If you don't have any image that's going off the page, you don't have to worry about it. But if you do have an image going off the page, you make sure it's big enough to go to that red line so that when it gets cut, you won't have little white space around it. So let's look for a second at the Pages window. And I'm once again in the Essentials workspace for right now. I'm not in the typography. I'm back in the Essentials. My guess is that the computers default into Essentials when they've been restarted anyway. So you should all be where I am as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Pages. And so in the Pages, we see that I have page 1 so far. If I come down here to the New Page and I click on Create New Page, I get pages 2 and pages 3. And because I selected Facing Pages, it tells me where the binding would be, right here in the center. And it gives me 2 pages that face each other. So you could imagine the binding happening right here. And these are my first 2 pages. So as I start to think about these first 2 pages, maybe I need to start setting up some basic layouts for these pages. So I could, for example, click on the ruler and drag and divide this page in half. So it's an 8.5 by 11, so 5.5. By the way, I held down Shift so it would jump to my ruler points. There you go. I've divided the page in half. And so maybe on this back side, I'm going to use a text box right there, and I might put my name. For example. And remember, I'm caring about typography, so maybe I'll create a hierarchy and make my name a little bit bigger, for example. Then over here, I might create my first table of contents, again, just on this side of the page. And so this might say contents. And this we will again make larger. So I'm staying consistent here. And let's come down. And I might say project 1. And let me insert some filler text. Too much. Get rid of that. So there's project 1. Project 2. Project 3. and project 4, for example. So I'm kind of working through this. I'm figuring out what feels right. I'm thinking about where my page, maybe I need a line that comes down across the tops of the pages. From a graphic standpoint, maybe it comes down to right about there. And maybe this needs to realign itself down a little bit more. Something like that. I'm starting to think through the framework. I'm starting to think this is what you're going to be doing today. You're going to be kind of creating the basic framework for your particular project. Ignore for right now the first page. We're not going to worry about the first page too much. Now, as this starts to fill out, each time I create more pages, for example, well, it would be pretty annoying to have to put these guides in over and over. And so in the world of InDesign, we have the actual pages, which you've seen, but we also in the pages window have something called masters. And so right here, there's an A master. I could create more than one master, but we'll start with the A master. Actually, I'm going to create a new one so that there'll be a brand new one. I'm going to right-click where it says A master, and I'm going to say New Master. This is going to be the B master. It's going to be 2 pages, and it's letter-sized, etc. Go ahead and say OK. And there it is, the B master. If I double-click on the B master, I'll get to the master page itself. And now the thing about a master is anything I put on the page will get applied to any page that has the master applied to it. So let me just do this as an illustration, not because I think this is necessarily the most attractive thing. Okay, let's say that I wanted the top of the page to be a gray bar. So I said, OK, let me come down here, and we'll do an 1.5" gray bar. Sorry, too much. Let me fill it with gray. We'll do a 50% gray. There it is. Let me use my free transform, make that a little bit smaller. Like that. It's just on the left page here, so I need it on the right page as well. So let me copy it, Control-C, Control-V, and we'll drop that same piece right there. So now I have a gray bar that goes across the top of the B master. And actually, technically, this should be larger and should go all the way to the bleed. So it should go all the way to right there. So it bleeds off the page. I didn't catch that. Oops. OK. So now I have that gray bar going across the top of the page in the masters. Let me go back to my pages. It's in the B masters. The pages that I've done so far, so this A, for example, or this pages 2 and 3, they have the A master applied to them. You can see in the upper corner of each of these pages there's an A. That means that they have the A master applied. If I wanted to change and I wanted to put the B master on these pages, I could select the page, right-click, and say Apply Master to Pages. And I'd say, you know what? I don't want the A master. I want the B master applied. I'll do it again for page 3 here. And I want the B master applied. And lo and behold, that content shows up on the page, that gray bar. I cannot, on the page, select the gray anymore. So anything that shows on a master will go on to the pages where the master is applied, but will not be selectable or movable or manipulatable. Yeah?
So it still has the line from the A master now.
Because these lines here were applied on the page itself, not on the master. So if I go back to the B master, for example, and I said, you know what, the B master is going to have 3 columns, for example. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. For example, my columns aren't even, but you get the idea. When I went back to this page, those guides would be there. But I couldn't select them or move them because they were applied on the master itself. So the master is designed for things that apply to multiple pages. And the advantage here, kind of like when we did character styles and paragraph styles, is that if I came back and I said, you know what, this gray bar, I really don't like it in that shade of gray. I want it to be blue or purple. I could change it. and it will change on the page itself. And it will also change on all of the pages that that master has been applied to. So far, I only have pages 2 and 3, but if I did pages 4 and 5, I could right-click and I could say Apply Master to Pages, B Master, and the masters would be applied to the pages 4 and 5. So let me come back here. Obviously, I didn't want it pink. I was using that as an example, but maybe I wanted it to have some slight opacity. There, I could come over and change the opacity of this. I need to switch over into the advanced for just a second so that I can get to my effects. And I can say that I wanted there to be 50% opacity on these two gray. Like that. So they'd be somewhat transparent. Now I can go back to my pages, and lo and behold, the master's applied correctly to those pages. So it's important to see how this really works. So I could also, on this master, I could start actually defining what's happening on a particular page. So maybe I want to have a 2-column layout. We already kind of set up where the middle was. There was my middle. Let me create 2 boxes. All right, so that's maybe 1. And this is maybe the second one there. This one needs to get a little bit smaller, like that. And given that, let me get rid of this. Let me copy, Control-C, Control-V. Put that one in there. Oops. Remember, I can use my Align tools. I could select both of these and open up Align by going to Window, Object and Layout, Align. And I could say, you know what, I want to have spacing in between them of a 1/16 of an inch. So 0.625, 0.0625, sorry. Spacing, there's the 1/16 of an inch. I could take both of those and I could move them over slightly, like that. I could also group them and then center them that way. So there they are centered. And now I have those 2 frames. I might also decide that I wanted these 2 and this here to have a 1/16 of an inch between them, so that my 1/16 of an inch are nice and concise. Yeah?
Is there like a tiny little fraction on the left side that's still hanging out?
A tiny little what?
Like is there space in between the edge of like what you'll see and the frames you have set up?
Space here, you mean? Yeah, I didn't do full bleed on these. I probably should do full bleed as an example. So let me go ahead and make those bigger. Hold on a second. To the pink line? That was my arbitrary margin. I can choose to have these go further if I wanted them to. So let's make these full bleed for illustration purposes. Oops. Let me ungroup them. I said Control-Alt-G to ungroup them, or you could right-click and say Ungroup. There we go. Let me take this one, and we'll make it big so that it goes to right there. We'll take this frame, and we'll make it big so that it goes to right there. Come on. There we go. So now that I've established those 2 frames in this particular view, when I go to any of the B masters, those frames are going to exist on the page. Again, I can't select them. Let's go to page 4, for example. I can't select them, but I can place content into them. So I can go to File and then Place, and I could go find something to put into the pictures here. So let me go. I don't have anything particularly exciting to put in there, but I can use some of the images from last class. And when I go to File, Place, when I click on top of this frame, it will place into that frame for me. So I can right-click and go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. Oops, that was not what I wanted. Right-click, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. And I could go back to File and then Place. and I could drop that one in as well. Again, right-click fitting, fill frame proportionally, and there you go. So I can use those frames that I created on the master on every page that they're on. So if I had more frames on page 5, I could come up to the page 5 here, and I could say, oh, you know, in page 5, we're going to do 3 frames. Let's do it. There's 2. And there's 3. I obviously made the frames too big. Let me take all 3 of those. I'm going to go back to my align tools here. Sorry, window, object and layout, align. And I'm going to distribute the spacing in between them. Then I will take them and group them, and then transform them back so that they fit in the page itself. For example, there we go. They're all fitting on the page. And then when I went to page 5, those 3 frames would already be there for me. Did I not give them? Yeah, they're all there. So when I could go into File and then Place, and I could drop in other images. So that one would go there. Right-click, fitting, fill frame proportionally. And then I could go through and do them for each of them. So then we go to File and then Place. Right-click, fitting, fill frame proportionally. Now I ran into a problem, and that is that when I'm putting these images on the page here, they are the gray bar that I created isn't on top. It's down below. And so that's a problem. So what I recommend doing is going back to the master itself and putting the gray bar at the top of the page. If I can get it selected here. Let me ungroup them. Come on. There we go, the gray bar. Go over to your layers, and there's currently only 1 layer. Create a new layer, and move this object up onto that layer. You do that by dragging this little box to the next layer. There it is. Now that's on top of all the rest of the content. And when I go back to page 4, the gray bar is going over the top of these. So if you get stuck with that, I can help you kind of sort through that. So the other thing that you can do in a master is you can also add things like page numbers. So if let's say that I wanted, in every upper corner here, I wanted there to be a page number. I'm going to work on the red layer, which would be my master layer. I'll go to File. Let me create a text box. Just a brand new text box. And inside of that text box, I might want to put the page number. Instead of just putting in like number 1 and having to change it, I'm going to go up to my Type menu, and I'm going to go into Insert Special Character, Markers, Current Page Number. And so I'll put in my current page number, and it'll say B. That's because I'm on the B master. However, if I put this, let's put it back on my document, up in that corner, make that a little bit smaller. There it is. When I go back to my pages, so let's say I went to this page, there's my first page. It's going to have a 3 in it because it's page 3. I move on here. It's going to have a 5 in it because it's page 5. So it's going to substitute in, based on that marker, what page number I'm on. Now, you can take this whole thing a step further. This is where I tend to lose people. So I'm going to tell you how to do this, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work for you or that you're going to think it's a good idea. But you can take this a step further, and that is that more than just a page number is available to you. So right here, I have a page number, but I can also include what's called a section marker. So let me come back here. I can go to type. I can go to insert special character, markers, section marker. And we'll put that in. And let's put it in brackets, for example. So this now says section B. When I move on to page 2, it's just giving me the brackets because I haven't defined a section yet. So let's say that starting on page 2 here, this is going to be, well, let me come down here to 4 and 5. Let's say starting on page 4, I want to go into numbering and section options. And so this is the start of a section. Right here under section marker, if I were to type in project 1 and say OK, it's going to then substitute in project 1, page 5. When I create more pages, 6, 7, it's still going to say project 1, 7. Create a couple more. There it is, project 1, 9. Now if I wanted to change, let's say this starting on page 8, it's project 2. I would right click and I go to numbering and section options. And we're going to start a section. This one is going to be project 2. And I'll say OK. And now page 9 has project 2, where page 7 has project 1. So it's kind of like creating chapters. You can do that in InDesign should you want to. So I would today like you to try to do the page number, because I think it's a good thing to try to do and to understand how your masters work. I'd like you to work through and try to set up some masters that feel appropriate. Before you get started, however, the most important thing for you to do is to go find some content to put in your portfolio. I'm just putting random stuff in as illustration, but you guys have your assignment 101 and your assignment 102 that need to go in already. So you already have those two pieces. Those are required to go into your portfolio. If you're in another class, in another studio, you've already taken 120 or you've done some other design work, by all means, try to include that in your portfolio. So just because I say in the assignment that it has to have all of your assignments from this class in it, not your exercises, just your assignments, it does not mean that you shouldn't put in any other work that you've done. I have to make sure it's an even playing field because some people haven't been in enough studios to have other outside work. But if you have, by all means, put that other outside work in. I would actually rather see that than the stuff from this class. But I can't force you to have that content. Does that make sense? So your purpose today is to get started with this layout and to start thinking about what feels appropriate, what looks good, etc. I'm going to go into my office. I'll get the stack of previous year's portfolios so you guys can look at what other people have done in the past. I will not say that all the stack that I pull out will be A's. They'll probably be A's and B's. I try to cull out and just put the A's out, but sometimes a few of them sneak in there. I used to put them all out, but I don't want you guys seeing the bad examples, so those get cut out. But for the most part, they're pretty good. I would say, generally speaking, each semester, out of your class, there's about 3 people who get A's on the portfolio. That's the average. Most of the time, it's because people rush. Most of the grades are in the B's, just in terms of how it goes. So. But like I said, I'll try to pull out the ones that I think are A's, and some of which go back to 2008. So I still have some of those portfolios. So you can see that. The other thing that you'll find on the portfolios that I'll bring into the back is I also asked students to include a sticky note with where they were printed and how much it cost to print them and or what style binding it was, because that can give you a better idea long term about where you're going to have them printed and whatever. I had a student last semester who went to, it was in Lafayette, it was called like Minuteman Press or something like that. And he had a very positive experience with them versus Kinko's. And it was also cheaper. So just for whatever it's worth, I'm forwarding that on to you because he seemed to really like them and thought it was a good deal and they worked with them and whatever. So when I find that information, I try to pass it on. Okay? There are online publishing houses where you can send your portfolio off to be printed. Truth is, you're not going to have your act together well enough to send it in time to have it come back. But if you are applying to grad school or something, that is certainly an option where you could have it professionally printed online and then shipped back to you. Okay? Are there any questions about the portfolio? A few? Yeah.
This is working with the page numbers.
Yes.
So on some of the examples, you had images instead of numbers.
Right.
How would I insert an image in there?
So that would just be an image that you placed into the master. And so instead of having, in this case, I used the B master for all the pages. You would have a B master and a C master, and each one representing one project. And so you'd have the little image that was on. So let's say, for example, that my project 1 was the B master. I'd come up here and I'd put a little frame. And I'd place something into it that represented the B master, or the first project. So let's say that image represented the first one. Now, every page would have that on it. That was project 1. But when I switched to project 2, I wouldn't want that same image on it anymore. So in that case, for project 2, I would create, if I liked the B master still, I could just duplicate the spread B master. But I would say that this time the image would change to whatever my project 2 image was. So there's my project 2 image. Now down here where these 2 pages were project 2, I would take them, I would right click and say change apply master to pages, and this would now be the C master, and that image would apply to all future pages from there. So you don't have to do it as a section, you would just do it as the image being placed as the master. So typically, an example, the book, the handbook that I wrote for you guys, that I have, I think, 12 different masters, depending on the page layouts. So you would end up with lots of these. I've only created 3 here, but you can end up with lots of different options in your masters. Don't be afraid to use the masters. That's what they're there for. OK? That was a good question. Another question.
Is there a general number of projects you should include in a portfolio? I mean, I realize it depends on how many pages are allowed in it, but
It always depends on the number of pages that are allowed. You don't want too few, but you don't want too many. I think one of the keys on it is making sure that you provide enough images or enough support documents for your particular design project such that the person who's looking at it can get a really good understanding of the project. So if you were responsible for one really complex project where you did a ton of design work and whatever, it may take you 3 or 4 pages to show all of that work. If you did a really simple design project, it might only take 1 page. At some point, somebody stole my grad school portfolio and never returned it. So I don't have that one anymore. But it's a good example of where I tried to divide it up. You know, the first project in the portfolio was what I thought at the time was my best project. And I spent, I think, 4 pages on it of 12. Then the next project, which was my next best project, I spent only 2 pages on it. And then the next page after that, I did 2 projects, 1 on each page. And so I kind of worked my way down in the importance level. So if you have enough content to support the pages, there's no reason not to use the pages, especially when there's no page limit. In this case, there's no page limit, so if you have the content, by all means, use it. So I would say, generally speaking, in a portfolio, let's assume right now that it's a 12-page portfolio. That 12 pages is what the grad school portfolio was allowed at Berkeley when I applied. That's why I'm using that number as an arbitrary number. I think for you guys in undergrad, when you apply to UCLA, I think they only let you have 6. Cal Poly lets you have fewer than that. It's like 4 pages or something. You'd have to double check. It gets stickier when you have less pages, obviously. But I would say in a 12-page portfolio, you might show between 4 and 6 projects, depending on how they lay out and what the complexity of the projects are. For you guys in industrial design, it's a little different because you might be able, it's a smaller project, you might be able to fit more. But then again, there's a lot of complexity to some of that stuff, even though it's small. So you may need more space, and there's nothing wrong with that. So for this particular class, though, go for the, it doesn't matter if you create a large volume of pages. So I've seen portfolios in the past. I think the longest portfolio somebody ever gave me was 57 pages. And he took it, I wish I still had a copy of his portfolio. He took it very seriously, worked and worked and worked on it. He was taking this, it was before the class requirements were structured. So he ended up taking this, and he was basically doing a skyscraper studio and was done. But he decided to come back and take this. So he had a ton of work to put into the portfolio. So that obviously, that helps. Depends on where you are. And if you have a lot of content to put in, you should put that content in. And the more you try to work with a variety of content sources, Oh, I have these AutoCAD drawings and I have this Photoshop stuff, the more you'll learn and adapt your portfolio to be able to accommodate different types of work. If all you've done is AutoCAD drafting and you have, project after project of AutoCAD drafting, do you really have to include it all? No, probably, because it's not really showing much different. And so it's the story of you, yes, because all you've ever done is AutoCAD drawing, but the only job you're ever going to get is AutoCAD drafting. You know what I mean? So I think for you guys, it's much more important to try to show projects. And I would also suggest that you organize your portfolio by project, not by skill. So don't say, here's my Photoshop stuff, here's my V-Ray stuff. Say, here's a design project. Here's my next design project.
Show like that you're able to.
Right, exactly. So let's say for you guys, you want to be able to show that you can do renderings in V-Ray, you can work in Fusion, and you can work in SolidWorks. Those are the skills you want. When you're doing a project, you're using all of those, so you make sure you include, here's some SolidWorks part of this project, and this is why it was valuable. And here's some V-Ray renderings of this part because I want to show that I can do V-Ray renderings. And so you mix it in, but it's based on the project, not based on the skill. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So if it's based on the project, you want it to go like we're taking it
So if it's what I would do is if it's based on project, your best work that you've ever done should be first. And your next best work should be second. And the reason that I suggest this is imagine for a second that you are in charge of selecting who's going to be admitted to grad school at Berkeley. And this is a good example because of the way the numbers work. Okay? So in the grad program, and any 1 year, they may let in somewhere between 15 and 20 people into the grad program for the year. They might get 3,000 applicants to get those 15 spots. You now are responsible for picking the 15 out of the 3,000. You have 3,000 portfolios on your desk. How long are you going to spend looking at every portfolio? Not that long. So you have to have the cover that gets them in the first place. Then as you imagine looking through a portfolio, I open it. First page, well, that's kind of interesting. Second page, that's kind of interesting. Third page, okay, flip, 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 flip through. Last page, okay, close it, done. Got about 30 seconds. So as you're, and that's different. That's an extreme example. If you're applying to work in a firm, an architecture firm, would they, maybe they have one spot and they have 15 applicants. Okay, you might get a couple minutes for each portfolio, but you're not going to get 30 minutes on a portfolio. Are they really going to read everything you wrote? Probably not. Now, if you got whittled down to where they were trying to pick between two people, maybe they would spend 30 minutes on your portfolio really reading it. But your initial pass is always most important thing first, start to flip, least important toward the end. I happen to really like to have something special at the end that's different because it generally, when you think about somebody looking at it, first couple pages they spend some time, middle they flip through, end if you have something interesting they might stop and wait for just a little bit longer because it's interesting, and then they close it. It gives them one lasting memorable impression. So the thing that I recommend, this is good you guys are asking the questions, the thing that I recommend for that last page is something that makes you totally you that is not related to whatever it is that you're doing. So for me personally, when I was going back to grad school, I had worked during the summer, not in an architecture firm, but I'd worked for a professor doing underwater ecology research in the summers, like flying an ROV robot and stuff. I don't know how I got connected into that, but it was really fun and it was really interesting to do. So I had to do a page that represented that in my portfolio because it was different. And so when somebody was looking at my portfolio and they're saying, yeah, this guy has a lot of skill and whatever, then they get to that last page and, oh, he's kind of an interesting person too. That's the idea of that last page. What kind of outside thing do you do that makes you different? It's kind of like when you write your essay to go to school, don't say that you played with Legos as a kid. Every single person who's done architecture played with Legos as a kid. Like, duh, right? So what makes you different than everybody else? You were a volunteer firefighter for 8 years. I don't know, you climbed Mount Everest. I don't know, you did something. Something makes you you. And so it's the same thing in a portfolio. What is that one thing that makes you different from everybody else? And I like that to be at the last page. That's a personal preference. It's not a mandate. You know, the first page having your name on it and table of contents, that's more of a mandate. Okay? More questions. These are good. No? Okay. Well, when you think of them, ask me. Yeah.
Well, I think it's more personal about like a piece of content and then what the
Say that again.
I want to say more personal about content.
Okay. I'll come and we'll talk about it. All right? Okay. I'll let you guys start to work.